This is Dr. Fox. Thank you all for your continued support for CRPN and CRPN Central. For more information about our mission, please contact us today at info@crpainnet.com for details.
Hey, I haven't seen you here before. Are you going to join the clinical trial?
I think so. My doctor told me I'm very sick and joining the trial might help.
Me too. This is my 4th visit. My mom really hopes this trial can help. Before, when the doctor told us there was nothing else he could do, she cried a lot, and I don't want her to be sad because of me.
I'm really scared. I hope it doesn't hurt. What's it like?
Everyone is really nice. They explained things in a way that I understood and made sure my mom and I felt comfortable about being in this trial. They did have to give us some shots and draw blood for tests, but you get snacks after, and the rooms have toys and games to help you think about other things.
I really don't like shots or blood draws, but that doesn't sound so bad.
Welcome to our office. I'm your coordinator, and I'll be here to help you during your trial. Are you ready to get started? Let's start by choosing your favorite toy and get you a snack.
I have to go for now. Maybe I'll see you around?
Of course. Welcome to the trial. Maybe I'll see you at the next visit, and I hope this trial will help both of us.
A parent's worst nightmare: to helplessly watch their child suffer through sickness or disease without the ability to help them feel better. And for many, the only remaining hope for our parents and their children often comes from the promise of a clinical trial. Parents, I know from personal experience how you feel, that you will do anything to save them from what could be a certainty, and that, if you could, you would move the entire world to help them live a better life. Don't give up, and please know you have an entire industry standing behind to help. Never be afraid to reach out, and please be patient with the process as we develop tomorrow's life-saving therapies. Children, it will be okay. Clinical research is here to help, and we want to make things better. Don't be afraid to tell your doctors how you feel. Thank you for being brave and for being part of the clinical trial that will help children just like you for years to come. Welcome to CRPN Central, the official podcast of the Clinical Research Payment Network. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Fox. CRPN Central discusses the real issues with our clinical research industry to explore and identify mutually beneficial solutions for all of our stakeholders. Children hurt too, and research can help, but only if we can accommodate their specialized needs throughout the journey. When our children are navigating through their diagnoses and participating in clinical trials, how can we foster supportive environments for our young trial participants throughout their clinical trial experiences? Today, we will discuss pediatric clinical trials and the experiences of our brave pediatric patients. In 2021, the World Health Organization cited 5 million deaths from children age 5 and under, with the majority of the deaths resulting from infectious disease, preterm birth complications, trauma, and congenital abnormalities, many of which may be preventable with properly performed clinical trials and interventions. First, we will speak with a courageous father who fostered and built a support network not only for his son, but for an entire industry of children who must endure tremendous health challenges. Then, we will speak with an innovator who designs and creates special toys designed to help children communicate their needs during healthcare and clinical research. To maintain valid comparisons, both interviews will use the same questions, and my guests did not know the questions before the interviews. We will reconvene after the interviews to compare guest responses, align ideas, and perhaps identify comprehensive methods we as research professionals may adopt to enhance the experiences of our pediatric trial participants. Our first guest is a father who, along with his son, a cancer survivor, is working to enhance the cancer treatment experience of our children who are going through the journey. Brian Burkhardt is the co-founder of the Oliver Patch Project, a program designed to provide love and support to children going through cancer treatments and their caretakers. Brian's story is a true inspiration for children and their caretakers around the world, and I am so thankful he has taken the time to speak with us today. Please welcome with me Mr. Brian Burkhardt. Brian Burkhardt, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, Dr. Fox, and super excited about all this.
Would you be willing to give the audience a brief introduction?
My name is Brian Burkhardt. I am the co-founder and executive director of Oliver Patch Project. My son Oliver was diagnosed in 2020. When we weren't in a hospital, we were on the sofa. What my wife and I did, we just put something on Facebook to our friends and family to send a patch in the mail. People asked what they could do, and it was a very uncomfortable thing for us to receive anything from anyone. We figured everyone's got a patch laying around in the drawer. In 1 month, we got 2,000 patches, and there was something about that and the love of a complete stranger that affected us so deeply. I'd take the patches with my needle and thread, and I would bring them to the hospital, and I sewed them on his jacket. Then I sewed them on my jacket, and then I sewed them on my wife's jacket. And my son Peter, we sewed him on his jacket as well. And my wife and I and Oliver would wear these to treatment every week. And in a strange way, they became a suit of armor for all of us, but most of all for Oliver. He knew where every patch was from. He may not have known the person, but he knew that this Grateful Dead patch was from a concert of a band that someone sent him. And what would happen is we'd walk down the hall and people would turn to Oliver and say, "I love you, Jack." And he's like, "Oh, thanks. I have leukemia." He became empowered rather than having his head down saying, "I have leukemia and I have cancer." And he's like, all these patches were sent to me by people that were sending love to me. And then what it did is it then took that quiet time afterwards when you tell someone that your child has leukemia, normally there's dead silence. And what that did is it filled that space with someone's opportunity to point to a patch on his jacket and say, "Oh my God, you love turtles? That's an awesome turtle patch." And it kind of made that communication easier. What we also found was the same way with child life staff, the social working staff, and also the doctors. It really was a great icebreaker and a way to kind of learn a little bit more about Oliver and his personality and kind of engage with him. So we were wearing them the treatments and we were seeing the responses. And one day he said to us, "I would like to make patches for other kids." And that's kind of the beginning of the Oliver Patch Project.
And you are, in fact, making patches and sending them to other kids, right?
Yeah, what happened is that someone at that point started a GoFundMe for us, and Oliver said, "I want to spend the money and make patches." My wife and I are both from the arts community. I reached out to some of the people that I was in this world with, and I said, "We're thinking about designing some patches, but the only criteria is that it has to be special for them. So it can't be something that you're going to make into a sticker or produce your own patch." I wanted to create a special gang, so to speak, for kids with cancer that they can belong. Before I knew it, I had 300 designs from around the world, and the outpouring of love again from this artistic community was really amazing. So what we did is we took those designs and we made a bunch of them into patches. Then what we do is we have those patches that the kids can pick from. Our program is 100% free and totally fun and awesome. It's available to any kids in active treatment in the United States that are battling cancer. And how it works is a child hears about our program either through the hospitals and our hospital partners or through social media. If it's in the hospital, they're handed a welcome patch. That welcome patch has a little bit of information on the back where then the parents go and they get their own warrior code. So they go into a separate portal that no one else can get into but the parent and their family. So then what they do is they pick out a jacket or a tote bag, and then they select 20 of their favorite patches, and then they give us their name or their nickname. We embroider their name, and what we do is we then take those patches, curate them on the jacket or tote, send them off to the seamstress, have the names embroidered, sew them all on, and then we send them that jacket or tote in the mail. And then from there, they'll automatically transition into our Patches of Positivity program. We found that 6 months into our treatment, it was really quiet. All the support and love you get in the beginning was...
People have to move on with their lives.
Yeah, and understandably, and no one to blame for that, but it became the hardest time for us because treatments were really kicking in. in. The reality of it was really kicking in. And with ALL, it's a 2.5-year process. So it's a longer road. Well, we as a family needed that love and support. We really knew when we started Oliver Patch Project, we wanted to stay with families and let them know that they were loved and supported through the next year of their journey. After they get a jacket, the following month for the next year, they get a free patch and a card with awesome animations that they can download a coloring sheet. And really what we do is we just keep it fun, light, and let them know that every month they get this awesome envelope in the mail. They know it's for them. Keeping in the nature of what we received in the mail, these kids can then look forward to getting something every month. That's the second component of the Oliver Patch Project, the Patches of Positivity program.
Today's theme is the pediatric patient experience, defined as what our children have to go through either through their treatments in care and healthcare or through clinical trials.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a number of questions, and I'm going to ask these questions to another individual.
Okay.
We're going to see how you answer these questions just to see if we can try to find an alignment on how we might try to better enhance the experiences of our pediatric patients.
Sounds great to me.
Could you walk me through his experience through healthcare from start to finish?
So 6 months prior to Oliver being diagnosed, we were in the hospital. He was complaining of pain in his lower abdomen. They couldn't find anything. So we went home. They said, sometimes you just don't know, and it's just like a freak thing. 6 months later, we were home and sitting there watching TV, and we saw Oliver was breathing very heavily on the sofa. We were like, let's go to emergency care and figure out what's going on. What they did is they had us go right to the hospital. Because of all the tests and everything we had prior 6 months ago, they said, okay, well, let's find out what's going on. We know you've had all these tests. Let's go for a bone marrow biopsy. They found that he had ALL and he was diagnosed with leukemia. That was kind of the beginning of our journey, which turned out to be a 2.5-year journey.
I know personally the emotions that you get from a diagnosis like that. It sounds like in the middle, while Oliver was going through his journey, it was rough. As you were going through this journey, as Oliver was going through this journey, did you see any changes in how he felt during the process?
I saw Oliver become a strong little boy who didn't complain about anything once. Oliver really rose to the occasion by him knowing that he was doing something good for other kids and walking into the hematology and oncology office and seeing 3 kids wearing jackets talking. That for him empowered him to know that he was doing something good for other kids. He was nothing but a true hero in this. And maybe that had to do with he wanted to make sure he was okay for mom and dad. I think there was a little bit of that. We always tried to say, hey, it's okay. You can let go. But we made sure that none of us were a victim of cancer. And I don't mean to offend anybody. Cancer is a very, very, very serious thing. And it's a very hard thing. But I'll be honest with you. I think people need to know when they go through it that it's okay to be okay. What happens is when you get a lot of feedback in the beginning, what you hear is, I don't know how you guys are doing this. I could never process this. This is my worst nightmare. Receiving that attention, you start to think, wow, how are we doing it? And can we do this? We're just about the positivity and love. And I think going at it with that positive attitude, for Oliver, he adopted that 100%. And he actually gave us the positivity that we needed when we had our moments that were, that were harder, like at night, when the lights went off at night and it was quiet.
That's when you have a chance to think.
We just put it in a different room in our head. And that may not be healthy, but it's kind of what we needed to do to get through it.
Compartmentalization is fine, especially in a situation like that.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the challenges that they face throughout their pediatric experiences?
I'll be honest with you, I've gotten to know many families. We have over 900 families and warriors in our program now. And also getting to see kids in clinic, in the hospital when we were there. The biggest issue that I see, it's really about developing relationships. With COVID, it was very hard. We hadn't met another family for over a year. And that's because everyone was separated. We realized how essential it was to have this community of love. What I think is the most important thing, and I think what families need more than anything, I actually know without a question of a doubt, they need to know that they're loved. You need to earn trust with these families. You need to develop that they belong and that they have a really good avenue for their kids to talk about the positivity for these kids. So we found that by giving these kids and these families this opportunity to kind of celebrate celebrate what they were going through, and they were part of a big network of people that didn't know race, that didn't know financial situations. It's kind of like the club that no one wants to be in, but when you're in it, you meet the most loving group of people that you could ever imagine. It kind of radiated this amazing community of people that also wanted to share positivity with other people. The biggest takeaway for me is that the treatments will not change. The protocol does not change. It's how you look at going through what you're experiencing that makes all the difference. I think that when you provide a good and stable and positive outlook going into anything you're going into, it's going to better situate you for handling. I have parents tell me that my child can't wait for their first chemo treatment because they're going to get their patch. And there's something about that. It's magical. That's something that's so horrible. These kids are looking forward to it because it's replaced with a reward.
It gives them something to focus on.
Gives them something to focus on.
I remember when you have a child who's going through something that doesn't happen to every child. I remember one of the things that you run into is a level of isolation.
Yes.
Where sometimes you don't want to leave the house because you don't want to meet strangers and have to explain your story every single time. You don't want to get the natural, oh, I'm so sorry look, or you don't want to get that thing that you've heard 1,000 times. It's a response from the public to try to show their support, but after a while it gets old. The challenge of facing the public is a protective mechanism in isolation. You choose to isolate so that you no longer have to face the pain of someone discovering what you're going through every single time. That is a huge challenge for our parents and our children to try to go through society. What are some of the positive experiences that you've seen during pediatric trials?
Because it was COVID, it was kind of an odd situation for us too, because you talk about isolation and that's 100% true. For us, man, showered with love, showered with people genuinely caring. Some of your closest friends don't know what to say. The gesture of a patch was for all the words that someone didn't know how to say too. There was many patches that just came in an envelope with no letter because people don't have the words. But the love came through. So that love, the care that we received in the hospital, also like clinical trials. And because of what the clinical trials done 40 years ago, 40 years ago, children weren't living with ALL. They weren't living. Because of what was done 40 years ago is why my son is where he is today and where a lot of kids are today. Looking at that and realizing the importance of clinical trials, and especially within the pediatric space and these kids, it's going to be a very different world 5 years, 20 years from now. That's super exciting for us. When we did leave the hospital, Oliver was crying when we left. And I said, what's going on? And he's like, I'm going to miss my family. And he was talking about the nurses and the doctors and the people we came really close with. And they are our family. It changed our life. The love of people that we didn't know, the love of people okay, maybe somewhat it's expected. And it was beautiful. Love of family, bringing family together. I'm one of 9 kids. So it brought all of my family in one giant text thread. Everyone was in communication. And now we still have that after the fact. So it brought people together. It brought community together. Even though it was isolated because of COVID, the communities that were formed were in many ways stronger. So we felt it from a hospital level to like a personal level to also us being able to share that love with other people. So as much as it was receiving, it was also giving. This whole experience, I've become such a better person because I became less cynical, less judgmental. You don't know what someone's going through. It's kind of like more forgiving in your daily walk.
And through tragedy, you're overcoming to make the world a better place.
100%.
Would you have started Oliver's patch project if this never happened?
Absolutely not. This thing, it's pretty amazing. Think about it, just the symbolism. We said patch because I figured everyone had a patch laying around and it would give us something to do and check the mail. Think about what a patch means. A patch is used to mend a hole, to sew two things together.
Patches heal, patches mend. Patches are also little mini memories.
Yeah.
They are memories of someone, they're core memories. It's a reason why someone makes the choice to put the effort. It takes time to sew things. It takes time to do that. And if you're going to use your time to put a memory on a memento, it means that's very important to you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of symbolism behind that in the patch. It's very important on what you're doing. We talked about the journey. We talked about the ups and the downs and where we're going. How do you think we can improve the pediatric participant experience?
I've had wonderful opportunity of being involved with SCRS and getting to know this world that I had no idea about. Getting to talk to so many amazing people in the different space, whether it's the pharma space or the trial space or the data worlds. What I realized, a word that comes up that's there that is never a word that I used to use, but is retention. In many ways, what Oliver Pat's project is retention in some way, but we don't use the word retention. We use support. And I think if we can change the way that we use the word with pediatrics, and instead of retention, we talk about support, because when you support and you love and you create a system and a program, a network, a level of communication that is consistent and the point that people can rely on it, you're building relationships that have essential relationships within this pediatric space with families and kids is 100% essential. If we start looking at developing relationships in the clinical trials, that would be the most important thing moving forward from my experience as a parent who's been through it.
That makes sense. When you say the word retention, the first thing that comes to my mind is a restraint, or like a handcuffs, or trying to keep something in a place where it doesn't want to be. It might be different if we were to think about it in a way to, as you said, support, create an environment that is so supportive that the people choose to stay. They don't have to be retained.
That's exactly.
That would be a very good opportunity to do that, especially in our pediatric populations. I have practiced in the martial arts.
Okay.
One of the things that we have always done as a school, it's our karate family.
Okay.
We have a little memento in the school. That's some kind of a physical object where whenever someone at our school is going through a very tough time, our karate instructor delivers that object to that person, almost in a symbolic way of saying that they have the love and support of the entire school behind them when they're going through something. The only ask is when they're done with it, return it. It's kind of like that little memento that they pass around throughout the family just to show as a symbol the love and support of all of the friends at the karate school. What you are doing to Oliver's Patch Project is just that. You are creating a community of love, and you're delivering to the people who are having a very hard time some kind of a symbol to let them know that they are not alone.
Yeah.
They are not isolated. Importantly, once you do begin this journey, you're going to have this feeling that you want to be a part of the community, that you want to pay it forward. It's almost like they say love is contagious.
Yeah.
What you're doing is bringing hope and healing to a lot of children who many times don't have the hope, and they feel like they're alone, and they feel like nobody else knows what they are going through. For that reason, I truly believe this is optimal for our pediatric patients, and importantly, the pediatric clinical trial participants. There may not be another group of children who have been through what they're doing because they're in a clinical trial, but to give them that support and that love as they're going through the journey gives them the strength that they need to keep going.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I wholeheartedly believe it. The most important thing is you have to have compassion with this. I think retention is like we succeeded or we did not. We retained them or we did not. You have to realize with families, it's like an emotional roller coaster for the child, for the families, for all the outside sources. You got to understand that every family is going through a different thing at a different moment, let alone single moms were in the hospital, the kid's an infant, they have 4 kids at home, they have to work a full-time job. It breaks your heart. So you got to remember that everyone copes in a different way. When you can say that's how they're coping, it gives you a forgiving heart. It's very important to look at this not as someone that saw it through or not. If you provide the support and love consistently, not just agenda driven, consistently for a period of time, you will build advocates for what you're doing. And overall, how their body is going to receive these trials and these treatments, it's going to give you a platform that will work. I don't think it's an option. I think it's essential. We just have to look at it in a different way. And you're right, it becomes infectious in many ways. our families become our ambassadors.
Brian, if I were to hand you the microphone and I said, what would you like to tell the audience about the pediatric experience in healthcare and clinical trials, what would you tell them?
I would say that the pediatric experience for us is all about creating a network of love and support and continued willingness to kind of understand people and where they're at. As far as what is being done in the clinical research space today is what's going to have similar results that my son has now for these kids. There's going to be amazing changes and developments with all this technology and treatments. It is 100% essential to battle things that are 100% terminal at this point. Research and trials that they're doing in any of the clinical space, cancer, brain tumors, blood disorders. We have to think about the future and we have to think about what's going to be. It's going to be a different world. Diagnoses that don't have a good outcome right now are going to be different in 5 years. It's essential to have this science behind us that are going to be pushing the boundaries. And I think that people need to be open and receptive to this as an option. It's a case-by-case basis. It depends on what you feel comfortable with. But I think if people have more knowledge about what was out there, they wouldn't feel so alone.
Most importantly, as isolated and as alone as it may feel, I would almost say it's important to just say, never give up, never lose hope. We're working on it. We're working on ways to help. Don't lose hope, because when you lose hope, that's when you start to lose a lot. Brian, importantly, thank you very much for what you and Oliver's Patch Project do for this community. I know for a fact that you are making lives a lot better when lives are very difficult. And thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today. I'm really looking forward to sharing this story with the audience.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and speak with you and to share your insight on this. It was really great. It just helps validate who we are and what we're doing and our mission. Dan, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Talk to you later, bro.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Our next guest is an innovative and understanding patient advocate who is dedicating his organization to helping children who are going through difficult diagnoses. Aaron Horowitz is the founder of Empath Labs, whose sole mission is to help children understand their healthcare journeys through the language of play. Empath's Rufus the Bear, Aflac Duck, and interactive products are revolutionizing how we can engage with our children in healthcare and research, and I am thrilled he has taken the time to share his stories with us today. Please welcome with me Mr. Aaron Horowitz. Aaron Horowitz, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Would you be willing to introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. I am the founder of Empath Labs. Our focus is on improving the pediatric patient experience. Been around for about 10 years, and we have a really unique way that we help children with illness navigate their health, and that is by speaking to them in their language, the language of play. So we have a range of different interactive toys, from Rufus the Bear, which is a teddy bear for kids with type 1 diabetes, to my special Aflac Duck, which is a social robot for kids with cancer and sickle cell disease, to the Purble that helps people find calm, and most recently, and what's led to our conversation today, Clinical Companions, which is a tool for kids in clinical trials and kids with rare diseases to really help guide them through their experience. Now, what all of these products do is they let kids mirror their medical procedures with their toys, because we know that for kids, it's incredibly empowering and powerful to give them a feeling of control during times when they might not be able to control their own care.
This is such a significant unmet need in our society. This is a niche. How in the world did you start this journey?
It's really twofold. As a child, I grew up with human growth hormone deficiency. So I grew up giving myself daily injections, and that really was a perspective shift for me. To be a child that was constantly going into the doctor's office and to have an aspect of my life that I didn't share with my peers. I never told my friends what I was going through. It was something that was really internalized. That was kind of the catalyzing experience for me as a child. Where that blossomed into the work that we're doing now wasn't until I was in college. I actually helped start this nonprofit called Design for America. And it's all about using design thinking, so the process of going and talking to to people and learning about their problems to solve problems with social impact. And our very, very first project was, how do we improve the lives of people living with type 1 diabetes? We started first interviewing moms in a coffee group, and then we got invited to their homes and we started interviewing moms and their children. And we saw that all of these kids would take a stuffed animal and give that stuffed animal diabetes. And what I mean by give them diabetes is literally draw insulin pumps on pieces of paper and staple it to the fur of their teddy bears, inject their stuffed animals, and really play through everything that was going on in their lives. And that was our aha moment. That was our light bulb moment, because we saw that kids were using imaginative play to act out everything that they were going through. Really, what got me started on this, was like one part personal experience and one part observation. And that has been the driving force for my passion to keep doing this work and to keep seeing how we can change children's understanding of their own illness.
The opportunities for that are immense. You could go all the way to having a role playing through informed consent so the children can actually understand their assent. You can have autistic populations in particular needing structure and control. You can build the structure around what they do for medical care and clinical research. The opportunities for Empath Lab and what you're doing could be as scaled as you need. I don't think there's going to be a limitation of need in the industry that you are targeting.
I really appreciate that. And that is kind of what we're thinking about, because we think of the way that we interact with children as a methodology. We have this methodology for how to drive emotional engagement and how to shift the relationship that children have with their medical care from one of fear, from one of ouchies and pokies, to one of delight, and to start to give kids these little pieces of dopamine that they're associating with their care, because there is joy that they get in giving medical care to these stuffies. There's joy that they get in interacting and unlocking content in the app, which is what happens when you take care of these animals. There's a little bit of kind of a reward cycle built in. You're absolutely right. It's so extensible. And so we are thinking about, how do we better inform children and make them emotionally engaged as part of their assets? Because our hypothesis is that the more emotionally engaged children are when they're signing up for a study, the more they understand what they're going to have to do, and the more they understand not only what they're going to have to do, but why they're doing it. Kids are inherently kind of philanthropic. They all want to give back. If we help them understand the way that they're giving back to all other kids with the illness that they have, UNICEF did this incredible project with something called Kid Power. So they had these exercise bands that they gave to kids. And the more that kids in the US exercised, you actually delivered food to kids in countries who were malnourished.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it was so awesome, and it was a transformative program, and kids got so excited about exercise because they were emotionally engaged, and they said, hey, there's kids who can't eat. There are kids who are hungry. The more we run around, the more we can help them. And how do we create that for kids in clinical research? Because you're going through all of these really scary things. You're going to the hospital or the clinical research site. You're getting your blood drawn. You're getting an injection, whatever it might be that you go through. In doing that, you're actually giving back. You're helping, hopefully, all other kids that are just like you have a better experience, have more access to treatment. We're really excited about kind of building the narrative so that kids who are participating in this research, they see themselves as heroes.
Today's theme for the podcast is pediatric participant experiences, or pediatric patient experiences, specifically the journey that our children go through when they go through challenging healthcare diagnoses or when they go through clinical trials. I'm going to ask you a number of questions. I've asked these questions to a previous interviewer, and then afterward, what we're going to do is we're going to compare the answers to the questions to understand certain similarities.
I'm excited.
Have you seen or viewed or experienced the journey of children as they've gone through healthcare challenges or clinical research?
Absolutely. All of our products were developed hand in hand with kids. Our teddy bear for kids with type 1 diabetes, we worked with about 350 kids who had type 1. Our duck for children with cancer, we were in a cancer hospital with about 100 kids going through chemo, kind of collaboratively developing. Our research product is a little bit new for us because we can't really have access to observing in a clinical research setting, but we have done interviews with kids who have gone through research studies to gain their perspective. And so much of what we see happening in clinical research really mirrors what we've observed with other children with illness illness with the type of fear and anticipatory anxiety that they get surrounding these types of doctor's visits.
Anyone who's listening to this podcast, any of our sites out there, let's try to figure out how we can fix that. Let's see if we can get you into some sites so that you can help the future children of our pediatric participants.
Yes, please.
Can you walk me through, from your experience and observations, a child's clinical trial or healthcare experience from start to finish?
For young kids, and I'll say maybe 3 to 9 who are going through diagnosis, there is at first an ambiguity in navigating the system. Getting the diagnosis is kind of that first step, and it really depends on what illness you're in. If you have type 1 diabetes, it's incredibly scary because a lot of these kids are going into DKA and they're getting incredibly hyperglycemic. They're not knowing why, and they're often sent to the emergency room, and that can be an immensely traumatic experience. The word traumatic is what carries through whether it's diabetes or whether it's cancer. The statistic that we quote often is that when you have cancer, you see 80 doctors on your day of diagnosis, because kids will often go in for something like a cold or something kind of benign, and something looks a little bit weird. Maybe they get a CT scan, maybe they're bounced to then their hospital from their doctor's office. And some kids can go from not knowing they have cancer to having a surgery that installs a portacath that very day. That first phase is trauma. It's so scary. As a child going through that, let alone a parent, often you really don't know what's going on because there's a level of urgency to getting that diagnosis. There's a level of medical jargon that you do not understand at a young kid, and let alone your parents maybe do not understand the level of medical jargon. And doctors aren't talking to you most often. They're talking to your parents. And that's something I remember so vividly, is that I was never spoken to. I was spoken about. And that is something that I think can be very isolating for kids. So that's the first phase of diagnosis. And then let's just transfer into maybe more routine treatment. Then as you go into routine treatment, often, whether it's diabetes or whether it's cancer, or whether it's any other illness, you have to do something on a regular basis that is not fun. And that is sometimes painful. That can lead to feelings like anticipatory anxiety. So getting scared, getting afraid, getting anxious because you know you're about to have an injection. We hear from parents of kids in clinical research that on the way to the site, on the way to the hospital, kids start crying. That is where I think there's a lot of commonalities between kids with chronic medical conditions or kids with things like cancer have with clinical research, is that anticipatory anxiety, the stress, the fear of ongoing treatment. And then, of course, there is this existential concern that children have and that parents have of, will it work? Will I get better? Maybe that's far less so in things like type 1 diabetes, where we know that provide insulin, it helps in the illness. I'm covering a broad range of medical conditions here, so I don't mean to paint anything with a broad brush. Everything is so specific to the condition. But for things like clinical research and for things like cancer, there is this level of existential concern. I'll say specifically from our experience dealing with children with cancer, that concern can be both for yourself as a child, but when we interviewed a lot of kids, it was really touching and heartbreaking. Kids would say, I just want my parents to be okay. Even if I don't make it, I want my parents to be okay. And so there was an immense amount of concern for those around them who were concerned about the child.
Going back to the child putting pressure on themselves as being the source of pain for their parents causes even more stress to their healing.
Correct.
What are some of the challenges that our children face in clinical trials?
I think at the very beginning, it starts with, even before assent, it starts with understanding what is a clinical trial. Like before you even get to the point of assenting, your parents are bringing you to this clinic or you're learning about this thing. The concept of participating in a clinical trial for a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old, that's not something that they know. First and foremost is just understanding, what is this thing that I'm participating in? It's different than just going to my maybe regular doctor. Why am I doing it? That's kind of the first. Then the next is in assent, not just why am I doing it and what is a clinical trial, but what am I going to experience? What am I signing up for? And what is the benefit to me as a child or to the community? Kind of understanding that. And then it switches directly into the fear and anxiety. How do I understand and get comfortable with what's about to happen? And how do I cope with the fear and anxiety that's associated with that? Particularly because many treatments don't have an immediate therapeutic benefit. So many clinical trials are for things that are preventative or for things where you might not see a clinical benefit for several months, that you might not improve symptoms, or it's investigational. It's an experiment. Maybe we don't even know if it might work and deliver that benefit. That is something where motivation becomes really challenging. When you're not seeing an immediate benefit and perhaps you're experiencing side effects effects, which are scary and which are causing that fear and anxiety, not only for you, but for your parents, why do I stay in the study? That then becomes the challenge for sponsors of retention and for sites of retention. For the child, it comes from that place of, why am I here? And what does that mean? The most common emotions are things like anxiety, things like fear, things like anger and frustration as to why. And then drilling down a layer deeper into, well, why are those feelings occurring? It's lack of control. It's lack of understanding for why it's important to participate in a clinical study. It's perhaps a lack of resources that are dealing with how to address and answer questions for children. Lack of involvement, speaking to them at their level.
Anytime you're in a situation of misunderstanding, if you drill down even further, there's some kind of a break in communication. As you were saying, speaking in the language of the person you're trying to get to. Kind of like what Empath Labs is doing with the communication of play, so that you can try to translate your ideas into a way that your target audience will thoroughly understand.
Absolutely. It's all about that concept of translation. If children could better understand, if they were better spoken to, if medical professionals, if folks at sites had tools, because it's really hard to talk to kids. It's not part of maybe your normal vernacular. It's not part of a typical clinical research study. Let's be real. The majority of clinical research is on adults. It's a real code switch, so to speak, to then, even in the span of one conversation, explain something to a parent and explain it to a child. It's so hard to do.
It is. I have over 80 sites in my network right now. And when they join the network, they fill out a site profile. It's amazing how many sites do not check the pediatric interest on their profile. It's hard to find sites that perform pediatric trials, which is so difficult to understand because you know there's children out there. And I guarantee you those children need the trials. They're qualified for it. But the infrastructure does not want to take on that challenge because, as you were saying, perhaps they do not have the tools that they need to be successful and they just avoid it. Maybe for that reason, access to trials is a pretty big challenge for our children.
I think access is a huge challenge. One thing that complicates that is that a lot of the pediatric trials that we see now are for children with rare diseases.
Yeah.
One of the challenges of having few sites and having rare populations is one of access. You might live 4, 5, 6 hours away from the closest site. What is that patient journey like? I remember speaking to a mom of a child with a rare disease, and 2 days out of every week, I believe it was for 2 years, they would drive 4 or 5 hours, go to the site, stay overnight in a hotel, and drive home the next day. And that's hard.
Especially with a rare disease.
Oh my gosh. Access, I think, is a huge challenge.
Healthcare integration and fighting the research deserts, that's one of my biggest passions. What about the victories? What's the biggest victory you've ever experienced in the pediatric space?
For us, the victory is seeing our products get in the hands of kids and seeing the way they react. So far, my happiest moment has been when we first delivered our My Special Aflac duck to children with cancer. That's my greatest joy. We've given 130,000 of these out around the world. There's no cost for children who receive them, children with diabetes, cancer, and sickle cell disease. To be able to provide this resource to those kids and see the way it's changed them, and then also to get letters back years later from some of those kids and their parents.
Have you ever experienced a before-after situation where there were children in very challenging situations where as soon as you bring Rufus or you bring the duck, you can see an improvement in what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were doing our research for designing our duck, we spent a lot of time in the Aflac Cancer Center. It started out where we would interview families. And then later on, as we started having prototypes, we would take our prototypes in and we would test them with kids and we would see how they interacted. I'll never forget, one of the key features of the duck is that it has these emoji cards. They're little circular tokens. There's 7 of them, and they each have a different face on the card. And when you tap that card to the duck's chest, the duck emotes. So we go into this patient room, and this patient happened to be nonverbal, autistic, going through chemotherapy.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, they had a very difficult time communicating with those around them. And I'm
feeling it too.
I'm getting starting to, Yeah, this young girl, the child life specialist, they asked the child, how does your duck feel about getting chemo today? And the child grabbed the mad emoji and put it on the duck, and the duck was mad.
Wow.
This child was using the duck as a proxy for their own emotions. And that is what we've seen. Our companions are tools for projection. This is a child that was nonverbal, and they were having a conversation, maybe not how you and I are having a conversation now, but they were having a conversation about how they were feeling in that moment.
Yes.
And they were able to communicate with those around them in a way that they couldn't before.
It feels like the intent, the desire to help these populations are there. You had an opportunity to do this. How do you think that we can improve the pediatric participant experience for our society's children?
First and foremost is seeing patient experience not as an afterthought, but as the primary objective. Because if a patient is not engaged in their health, you're going to have, in a clinical research setting, more protocol deviations. You're going to have more time spent at sites to calm children down and get them comfortable. It's going to be more difficult to recruit patients into these studies. We need to not see patient experience as a line item that's 2% of the budget cost. We need to see patient experience as critical to the execution of these studies. Patient experience isn't an afterthought. It's not the icing on the cake. We need to start thinking through the eyes of the patient. We need to start thinking through the eyes of children and start seeing the healthcare experience through their eyes, because it's very, very different than the way that we navigate the patient journey.
When you look at a protocol, you've got primary and secondary endpoints. Your primary endpoint should be patient experience, patient satisfaction. Because if you don't focus on that, if you're trying to collect data on the response of a patient and not on that patient experience itself, you could actually be skewing your data. If you don't have a patient experience that's optimal, you're going to have increased stress hormones, all these bad things. You're literally going to influence the outcome of your clinical trial if you do not first focus on your patient. Patient first is not just a saying, but it is literally the target that we should be looking at in every clinical trial.
It absolutely is something that needs to be monitored, because if we can't measure it, we can't improve it. There are measurement tools out there. I know that there are validated survey measures that look at patient experience and that look at pediatric experience. The level that they are pervasive in the industry, I am not sure, but we need to do a better job at doing it, and we need to create tools and better leverage things like patient advisory boards and child advisory boards as we're reviewing protocols and as protocols are being designed. As you said, it's critical to make sure that patient experience is an endpoint. It's also critical to make sure that that protocol in the first place is not traumatic. How do we start to define and quantify pediatric medical trauma in the context of clinical research? Because these clinical trials can be traumatic for children.
Very brilliant idea.
In the FDA guidance for the ethical considerations of conducting clinical research with children, we need to be looking and saying the FDA issues guidance to consider patient experience, to consider medical trauma as a part of protocol development in the same way that we now create diversity plans. This is not what the guidance does currently, but my hope is that over time, as these tools get developed, as they get adopted, it becomes kind of written into the guidances that companies must follow as they design and then go on and execute these studies.
And I wonder if we'll stop at pediatrics, because realistically, the gauntlet that some of these writers put patients through, regardless of age, is frankly unacceptable on a clinical level.
Absolutely.
If I were to hand you the microphone right now and I said, what would you like to tell the entire industry about the pediatric patient experience, what would you tell them?
Patient engagement and pediatric experience is not an afterthought in clinical research. It should be the primary concern and the primary objective, because not only will it accelerate a trial by improving retention, by reducing protocol deviations, and by better engaging children and helping them adhere to treatment, but it will also fundamentally change that child and that family's relationship with your brand and with your company. I think it all goes back to ensuring that we have a patient experience from the sponsor standpoint, to have faster trials that cost less money and build brand loyalty, and what I care about most is from the patient point, to have patients that aren't traumatized going through clinical research, that aren't subjected to stress and anxiety related to these studies, and where we can give them not only joy, but empowerment, knowing that they are the hero of the story. They are the ones that are paving the way for all of the children like them who are coming afterwards.
Patient centricity beyond patient centricity. Literally everything from protocol to experience to logistics, everything revolves around that patient having the optimal experience in a clinical trial.
Absolutely.
Aaron, thanks so much for coming on to CRPN Central. I can't wait to share this with the audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fox. Real pleasure.
I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Brian, his family, and Oliver navigated a difficult cancer diagnosis for 2 years by wearing a suit of patch armor from his community. Oliver became a strong boy, and his strength lifted up and inspired his family, even during the hard times. Sending Oliver patches gave him confidence during his cancer treatments, and the community of love inspired Brian's family to do the same for the country's pediatric cancer community. Families going through the cancer journey with their children may often feel isolated and separated from society. They need to know they are loved, and creating a loving community of positivity and love improves perspectives and creates better situations during challenging cancer treatments. The clinical trials performed 40 years ago saved Oliver's life, and the trials today will save the lives of children for decades to come. To improve trial experiences, we need to move away from agenda-driven retention and begin to build understanding relationships of support and encouragement for our pediatric participants and their families, so they may never lose hope. Aaron has helped children through their healthcare experiences through the language of play, from creating teddy bears for type 1 diabetic children to ducks for cancer patients, for 10 years. Treatments in healthcare can be traumatic and isolating for our children when they are talked about, not talked to. And by speaking a language of play that our children understand through toys that empower emotional projection and communication, we may shift relationships from fear and anticipatory anxiety of traumatic experiences toward emotionally engaging joy in their care through an understanding communication that empowers them to be the heroes of our clinical trials. The pediatric participant experience is not an afterthought, and instead it should be a primary objective for improved clinical research. To do so, we must make it a priority to see protocols through the eyes of our young heroes and develop them to reduce medical trauma and align the needs of our participants. Both of today's guests confirmed pediatric healthcare and clinical trials can be difficult, challenging, and even traumatic for children and their families, and that strong networks and communication tools are critical to reduce anxiety and misunderstandings. And while Brian believes strong, loving, and supporting relationships should be a focus instead of retention, Aaron believes we must prioritize the patient experience above every variable during a protocol's development. So, how can we foster supportive environments for our young trial participants throughout their clinical trial experiences? Combined, our guests' interviews confirmed common and necessary variables. To create successful pediatric participant experiences, we must focus on relationships, compassion, and communication. Listen to children and their families, and develop emotionally engaging relationships of love and positivity. Consider their unique perspectives and provide empathy to their needs. Listen and provide them with the influential opportunities and tools they need to communicate their feelings, and ensure they understand fully that because of their diligence during difficult times, they are truly the heroes for generations of children to come. Thank you for listening to today's special podcast dedicated to our courageous and young clinical trial participants. Children who brave clinical trials are absolute heroes of our society, and they deserve our utmost respect. If you feel strongly about supporting the experiences of our pediatric patients, please consider donating to Oliver Patch Project or asking your clinical research sites to inquire about collaborations with Empath Labs. Thank you to Brian and Aaron for sharing their powerful stories with us today. Thank you to our community voice volunteers, Scarlet, Resmiranda, and Laura Hilty, for building today's CRP in short. Thank you to my brilliant daughter, Scarlet, for recommending this episode topic. And finally, Thank you to my CRP and Central sponsors for helping to make this episode possible. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on CRP and Central.